Welcome to the first session of the ICRP 2023 conference. Session 1 title is Going Beyond the Dose, Wellbeing in Radiological Protection. So today, we will chair this session. So at first, I'd like to introduce the chairperson, Dr. Emily van Devender. She is the head of Radiation and Health Unit at the WHO headquarters in Geneva, Switzerland. This unit covers the public health aspect of ionizing and non-ionizing radiation safety and provides the information and guidance to national authorities on radiation protection and health.
Thank you, Noboru. And I would like to introduce my co-chair, Noboru Takamura, who is a full professor at the Nagasaki University School of Medicine. He's also been a technical officer at WHO in 2000 and 2010. And since the Fukushima accident, he has been very much involved with the Fukushima University and is currently the vice director of the Institute of Environmental Radioactivity and the director of the Great East Japan Earthquake and Nuclear Disaster Memorial Museum. In addition, Professor Takamura is an honorary professor at Gomel State Medical University in Belarus and honorary doctor of the Belarusian State Medical University. So together we will co-chair this first session on going beyond dose and thinking about well-being in radiation protection. And I have a couple slides, so I'll go to the podium. Great, can you hear me? Excellent. So just a couple of words about the structure of the session. Since it's the first session, we will explain to you how these sessions go. So first we will start with a review of the posters and the videos that have been allocated to this specific session. The review will be given by Dr. Seiko Hirota from Hiroshima University. And then we will have 4 presentations on various topics of 15 minutes each, followed by a panel discussion for 20 minutes. After each presentation, you may ask 1 or 2 burning questions that you may have to the presenter, and then we will move to the next speaker. So this session is entitled Going Beyond Dose, Wellbeing in Radiation Protection. So some of the first thoughts you may have are, what is well-being, and why are we discussing this here? So I would like to explain maybe a little bit why we are talking about well-being in this first session. First, let's look at the definition of health as per the World Health Organization's definition that was set up in its constitution in 1948. So this year, 75 years ago. And health is defined as a state of complete physical, social, and mental well-being, and not just the absence of disease or infirmity. And this definition of health focuses not only on individuals and disease prevention and treatment, but also addresses the factors that collectively create health and well-being, which are very much represented by the United Nations Sustainable Development Goals. So a recent definition of well-being, from the WHO Health Promotion Glossary of Terms, describes well-being as a positive state experienced by individuals and also societies. Similar to health, it is a resource for daily life and is determined by the social, the economic, and the environmental conditions that we have around us. So really, well-being encompasses quality of life, as well as the ability of people and societies to contribute to the world with a sense of purpose and meaning. And so a society's well-being can be observed by the extent to which they are resilient, they build capacity for action, and also they are prepared to rise above challenges. When you hear this, I imagine you think about Japan. And I have to say that being in Japan, the word resilience is one that I heard so many times and also felt to describe the Japanese people in the aftermath of the Great East Japan earthquake. So when we talk about radiation protection and well-being, we have to think about the fact that a comprehensive understanding of health implies that all systems and structures that govern the determinants of health, and that would include those systems that deal with radiation, should take account of the implications of their activities in relation to the impact on individual and collective health and well-being. And so with this, I would like to say that through the ICRP Vancouver Call for Action, through the stated interest in connecting radiation protection or radiological protection to the UN Sustainable Development Goals, and by reflecting on the concept of well-being, the ICRP activities that we will hear about this week very much embrace the important societal shifts that we are currently facing. So I would like to start this discussion by first introducing Seiko and giving her the floor to discuss the posters and videos that we received. Thank you.
Good morning, I'm Seiko Hirota from Hiroshima University. So let me start. I'd like to introduce the contributed posters and videos in this session. In this session, 7 posters and 1 video are accepted, and the common theme of this presentation is related to the well-being in the context of radiation protection in the present era. So some presentations aim to improve the management by considering the individual risk perception and satisfaction in radiation protection of exposed people to protect their mind and peace of mind, mental health. And other presentations are related to new approaches to radiation protection in the current context, addressing issues such as nuclear security, COVID-19, and global warming. And the other presentation introduces trials for optimizing radiation dose in medical field. So keywords is the sense of security, so peace of mind, and safety in newly emerging situations, and safety in medical exposure. And here is the distribution of the topics of presentation. So 2 posters are related to the sense of security, and 3 posters are related to the safety in newly emerging situations, and other 3 presentation is related to the safety in medical exposure. So now let me explain introduce each poster briefly. One poster suggests the new dose distribution model of the occupational radiation workers, especially with the high accumulative dose. And the new model is take into consideration the impact of their satisfaction with radiation protection. And by using the country scale as a satisfaction, expressing satisfaction of them. So that is commonly used for the modeling happiness. And authors validate that model by using the real-world data of the commercialized water reactor in the United States. And the other poster related to the sense of security introduced the results of the survey related to the dose limit to protect maternal and fetal health. So in Japan, female radiation workers of reproductive age have adopted a stricter limit, which is not the one recommended by ICRP. So authors conducted two questionnaire survey to the women in pregnant and the female radiation workers in medical fields. And it's revealed that the high-risk period for the fetus starts before mothers are aware of their pregnancy, and almost all respondents feel the need for the current stricter dose limit. And two posters and one video is related to the safety in newly emerging situations. One is related to the nuclear security. From Korea, the authors reported the status of high-risk radiation sources and their security evaluation in recent 6 years. And others authors are sharing their experience with the regulatory inspection, remote inspection under the COVID-19 situation. They reported it for the discussion and exchange the ideas with all of you. So please go to the see the poster. And the last one related to the global warming. The authors suggest that adopting a broad perspective to protect the total environment, which is needed for our well-beings. So not only by the reduction of radiation risk, but also the considering other risk factors such as global warming. So, and the authors proposed using the competing risk model for this purpose. And the last is the 3 posters are related to the safety in medical exposure. So one is from UAE, and so authors reported their practice of radiation protection for pediatric patients in the healthcare facility. And others from Philippines, and authors reported evaluate the granular dose for the newly technique of the mammography. And the last one, authors developed a real-time dose simulator to prevent unnecessary exposure of interventional radiologists. So because this conference are being held in Japan, so many presentations are from Asia. And the affiliation of presenters are the university and national institute and hospital. And among the people from university, many of them belong to the medical department. So it implies the medical exposure is hot topics. So now, so from these presentations, in order to achieve well-being in radiation protection, it is essential to pursue a sense of security, safety in newly emerging situations, and safety in medical exposure. So on-site presentation is tomorrow, and you can see the all presentations anytime on the poster portal. So please enjoy presentation in this session. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Seiko-san, for wonderful reviewing of the poster session and also the video. So now we are going to invite the first speaker, Dr. Janet Carr. Dr. Carr is the WHO Radiation Health Unit at the WHO headquarters in Geneva. And then she joined WHO in 2002, where she is the technical lead for radiation emergency, including preparedness, response, and recovery. Dr. Carr coordinates two global networks. One is LAMPERN, the other is BioDoseNet, and coordinates the development of WHO information products, guidelines, recommendations, such as WHO framework for mental health and psychosocial support in nuclear emergency. So, Janet, floor is yours.
Thank you very much, Professor Takamura, for the introduction. First of all, I would like to thank the organizers for giving us this opportunity to present WHO's work on this very important topic. And I'm also very happy to be here to reconnect with everybody live in 3D dimension, finally. It's really a remarkable occasion to be here. I want to also to thank my colleagues from the WHO Department of Mental Health, who contributes, of course, to this work, who leads this work within the WHO, and the work on development of the WHO framework on mental health and psychosocial support is truly a joint a result of this joint work. I should have stated that MHPSS spelled out, it states for mental health and psychosocial support. Okay, how do we go here? October 10 marked the World Mental Health Day under the logo of Our Minds, Our Rights. Mental health is a basic human right for all people. Everyone has a right to the highest attainable standard of mental health, including the right to be protected from mental health risks, the right to available and accessible good quality care, and the right to liberty, independence, and inclusion in the community. Good mental health is vital to our overall health and well-being, as Emily just mentioned earlier. Yet 1 in 8 people globally are living with mental health conditions, which impact their physical health, their well-being, and their livelihoods. Moreover, mental health conditions are affecting an increasing number of adolescents and young people. And as of course, we all know any type of emergencies and crisis situations can affect our well-being and mental health. This came across profoundly both after Chernobyl accident and also after Fukushima Daiichi nuclear power plant accident. And more recently, the mental health impact of the global pandemic on COVID has been also significantly important component and the impact of the pandemic. It caused widespread anxiety, panic, feeling of helplessness, and uncertainty. And of course, many of you have seen papers underlining the similarities between response to radiation emergencies and COVID, and one of the main features of these similarities is the psychosocial impact of this type of emergencies. Over the last 2 decades, WHO has actively supported mental health during emergencies by leading and co-leading interagency efforts on mental health and psychosocial support in various emergency settings. Those are natural disasters, those are military conflicts and unrests, outbreaks, and any types of emergencies. And countries are increasingly showing greater recognition of the importance of this area. As mentioned, during COVID pandemic, the number of countries with functioning multi-sectorial MHPSS services in emergencies has doubled, and 90% of member states of WHO responded to WHO survey in early 2021 and reported that this type of intervention was included in their overall COVID-19 response plans. During 74th World Health Assembly in May 2021, delegates endorsed a comprehensive mental health action plan 2013 to 2030. For the first time, this global plan of action includes, among others, an indicator on preparedness for providing mental health and psychosocial support during emergencies. With regard to radiological and nuclear emergencies, we know that international safety standards and guides and technical reports do acknowledge the need for provisions addressing non-radiological health consequences of such emergencies. However, practical guidance on how exactly to address these non-radiological health consequences wasn't readily available. From another hand, there is an extensive pool of resources available for managing mental health aspects of disaster preparedness, response, and recovery. But the existing scope of these humanitarian disasters did not so far include radiation emergencies. To address this issue, a few years ago, WHO and the Nuclear Energy Agency, NEA-OECD, they set up a joint collaborative project to address this gap. It was a two-phase project. During the first phase, WHO developed a high-level policy framework on existing, synthesizing all existing WHO and Interagency Standing Committee guidelines on mental health in emergencies. This part, of course, was led by WHO, and it has resulted in publication of the framework, which as I'm presenting now. You have the links to the videos and to the document download itself, and I believe the organizers will provide the PowerPoints to all participants after the conference. As a second phase, taking further this framework, NEA expert working group developed practical guidance for emergency response planners and managers for efficient mitigation of psychosocial impact. And you will hear next presentation describing this work. I want to briefly introduce the structure of the document. First of all, we talk about cross-cutting issues which apply to all phases of emergency preparedness, response, and recovery. And we call them 5 Cs, including coordination, communication, capacity building, community engagement, and core ethical principles. And then we further talk about integrating of each of the aspects throughout each of the phases. We also discuss challenges in implementation of the framework and address the research needs and gaps in research. Very briefly about each of the Cs. Coordination. It is everybody agrees that coordination is extremely important. Even GSR Part 7 highlights the need to coordinate between sectors. Also, international health regulations puts upfront the need to coordinate between sectors in response to radiological nuclear emergencies. So how the framework brings this in? It is recommended to set up the working groups in each stakeholder agency involved in emergency, and this working group should involve the representative of these stakeholder groups, agencies, and they have to work together, and they have to have functional links between themselves and to make sure that they all coming from the same basic point of view and the shared principles and the resources for addressing mental health and psychosocial support. General health and mental health professionals will be working in partnership with these other sectors, for example, the sector on communication, education, community engagement, disaster coordination, civil protection, law enforcement, etc., to ensure that the relevant MHPSS interventions are timely and properly implemented. Communications, no need to emphasize, because communication is a key for successful implementation of emergency protective actions, interventions. We really need to make sure that we are able to provide efficient, truthful, reliable, comprehensible communication to target groups. WHO has developed guidelines for communicating risk in public health emergencies, and our framework incorporates main principles of these guidelines. Also would like to point out that during COVID pandemic, WHO actually has singled out, let's say, invented this new field of science called infodemic. There have been already enormous amount of work put in, conference held, and documents and guidelines developed on managing all this false information, rumors, and things which really can present a great impediment into implementation of protective actions. Community engagement is another very, very important element of this framework. Also, IAEA's GSG 11 report defines community resilience as capacity of a community to be able to recover quickly and easily from the consequences of the emergency. Community resilience depends on various factors. Those are local networks, relationships, the presence of leadership and governments, local collective knowledge, of course, health conditions and available resources, economic conditions, etc. In any crisis, the first point of contact for anyone will be closest community. These are your neighbors, friends, family, colleagues, etc. These communities, they have inner resources to support each other in crisis, and they will be the first ones to fall back on. Local religious institutions, activity groups, associations, societies, and other groups from local communities, they understand local needs and are better positioned to respond in a more sensitive manner. So emergency planners and responders should be aware of these local resources and communities. They have to map them in advance during preparedness. They have to have contacts in these groups and communities. They have to know the ways to work with them and engage with them. People are first and foremost to be viewed as active participants in improving individual and collective well-being, rather than passive recipients of services that are delivered by others. Use of community-based MHPSS approach facilitates families, groups, communities to support and care for others in a way that encourage recovery and reinforce resilience. Very quickly want to point out to this collective established by WHO, UNICEF, and the International Federation of Red Cross. RCC stands for Risk Communication Community Engagement, and this website provides a plethora of tools and infographics, fact sheets, Q&As on how to work with communities in emergencies. Capacity building also is extremely important element of the framework, and each sector should put resources in training their staff to provide basic mental health support and psychosocial support to support both responders and also affected population. Core ethical principles is the fifth C. They are quite similar to those underpinning the system of radiation protection, which is beneficence, non-maleficence, prudence, justice, and dignity. Furthermore, our framework elaborates on the factors such as taking care about not labeling the populations to avoid stigmatization, to ensure the accountability, integrity, transparency of the interventions, and also to make sure that equity principle is applied to the recipients of the interventions. Just to finalize my presentation, a few words about WHO working in Ukraine to support national efforts on psychosocial support to people affected by the war in Ukraine. WHO is actually supporting the initiative led by First Lady of Ukraine, Elena Zelenska, which addresses the needs of the affected people by the war in Ukraine. This initiative uses a framework for prioritized multi-sectoral mental health and psychosocial actions jointly with Ministry of Health in Ukraine and WHO for long-term care of these people with mental health conditions. WHO supported 60 community mental health teams and trained more than 700 specialists in the management of stress-related mental health conditions in challenging new circumstances. WHO coordinates more than 200 partners in Ukraine engaged in capacity building of primary healthcare workers, including WHO-developed tools. And we also have online course to address the rapidly growing demand for MHPSS interventions and make mental health services available in primary healthcare facilities. This course also includes a special module on MHPSS in radiation emergencies, also available in Ukrainian language. If you go to the WHO website and tap in mental health response in emergencies, it will bring you to the page with all sorts of guides, tools, training materials, information materials for public, infographics, and also special materials developed for children. That will be my conclusive slide. Thank you very much for your attention.
Thank you very much, Janet. So, in the end of this session, we will have a discussion time, and then we can accept the question from audience. But only just one quick question will be accepted now. Do you have any quick questions? Okay, if no, shall we go to the next presentation? Okay. So next presentator speaker is Julie Bird. She is radiation and health science specialist with the Canadian Nuclear Safety Commission. Her research focusing on the potential health effects from exposure to low dose of radiation. She is an advisor for the Canadian delegation to UNSCARE. Then she also serves on Committee 4 of ICRP and is involved in several ICRP task groups. She is speaking here today as Vice Chair of OECD NERS Experts Group on Non-Radiological Health Aspects of Radiation Emergency Planning and Response. Okay, Julie, floor is yours.
Thank you very much for that kind introduction. It is my distinct honor to be here. It is my very first time in this beautiful country. It is also my very first time speaking at an ICRP symposium. So if you will indulge me, I'm going to take a photo of you, and I'm going to send that to my parents because you are a very impressive audience that I'm very excited to present to. So, as mentioned, I'm here in my capacity with my NEA hat on, and I've been asked to share an update on some guidance that we've been developing for the past few years. So as I'm sure this audience is very well aware, historically, radiation protection really focuses on minimizing that radiation dose in different exposure situations, particularly when we're talking about emergencies. But lessons learned from past accidents has shown that mental health and psychosocial consequences can in fact outweigh physical radiation health impacts. So it's for that reason that it's really important to integrate mental health and psychosocial supports into radiation protection. And we can do that in the planning and preparedness phase, during an emergency, and then continue to do that after an emergency. So I've included two examples on the slide here for you to look at later if you're not familiar with them, of where we're starting to see integration happen already. But perhaps the most important document pushing this agenda forward, as you just heard from our wonderful previous presenter, is the WHO framework on mental health and psychosocial support in radiological and nuclear emergencies. So I'm not going to go into detail about this report. We've heard about it. But this is kind of where it all began, as we just heard. So the working group that I'm part of for the NEA as their vice chair, I'll stick to the acronym, but it's the Expert Group on Non-Radiological Public Health Aspects of Radiation Emergency Planning and Response. So I'm just going to stick with EG&R. So our charge with this group was to take the WHO framework that you just heard about and operationalize it to make it practical and real and tangible things that you can do. So as first steps, jointly with the World Health Organization, they organized 2 webinars. This was prior to me joining the group. And they wanted to really investigate lessons learned from non-nuclear crises. There's a lot to learn from those situations, such as the COVID-19 pandemic. So we're hoping that this could help with lessons learned to integrate mental health and psychosocial supports into nuclear and radiological emergencies, pull those lessons learned into nuclear and radiological emergencies. So the first web event was held on June 26, 2020, where international experts shared their experiences, their research, and their views. The first one was titled The Mitigation of Psychological Impacts of Crisis Response. And the second web event, which was on July 10th of 2020, focused on community engagement and resilience throughout the entire emergency cycle. So from preparedness to response to recovery. I've included an image on this slide, not for you to read here today, but to be able to go find later on should you want to either look at the recordings or the presentations that are available on the NEA website that's posted as well. So the document that we're talking about today, this practical guidance document that the NEA is working on, is divided into background chapters. The meat of the document is really that practical guidance piece, and then other bookending chapters as well. So the background, as you would expect, really goes into radiological nuclear emergencies, what is ionizing radiation, what's the biological effects of that, the uncertainty with that, what is RP, what's emergency management. But the real point is how to integrate mental health and psychosocial supports into radiation protection for emergency management. So the way that we do that is with this practical guidance piece. So I will show you in a couple slides of what that looks like. We have a summary table with 29 actions listed that can be taken. And 13 of those 29 have detailed action sheets to complement where no previous information was able to be pulled from non-radiological situations. So that's where our group had to develop that material. So the draft guidance document concludes, of course, with some challenges and future research needs, as well as some conclusions. So I'm not going to go through all 29 actions. Don't worry, you haven't had enough coffee for that yet, and I'm between you and coffee. So I'll just give you some buckets of what those actions have been split up into. So very much separated into actions that can be taken in the preparedness phase, actions that can be taken in the response phase, and actions that can be taken in the recovery phase. So in that preparedness phase, the types of actions are planning for and looking forward what could be done in advance. And one of the first things, one of the most important things, is having a group that can coordinate this integration, this assessment, and what is needed for mental health and psychosocial supports. It includes a lot of materials and engaging community leaders, vulnerable populations, and not to mention liaising with healthcare providers. And then when you move to the response phase, what happens is rather than planning for all of those types of activities, you're actioning them. And then in the recovery phase, what you're doing is you're moving away from actioning them to refreshing them. Is this still appropriate for the situation I'm in? Do I need to change my language or focus or efforts with regards to the actions that have been taken? So here's an example of one row of the 29 rows. And as it happens, it just happens to be an action for the recovery phase. And the title is Refresh Public Communication Strategy for the Recovery Phase, and make sure that those communication strategies in fact include MHPSS and how to do that. It also touches on stakeholders and human resources that are needed, the risks that should be considered. This one's really important. Monitoring of achievements and outputs. What does success look like? If you do these things, then you have successfully completed this action, as well as some indicators to go along with those outputs. And of course, a reference column to show you where we've gone and pulled this information from, particularly for non-nuclear situations. Some of the documents in the previous presentation were key elements in how we populated this table. So again, not for you to read, but just to show you what a detailed action sheet might look like. It's about 2 to 3 pages. It's a lot of information to cram, but it needed to be short and concise. So it's very similar to the previous action sheet, and it includes information on like key principles, the 5 C's that we just saw, background information as to why this is important, key recommendations, but also the action steps. So you can just see the bulleted numbers, sequential, orderly steps that can be taken to achieve that action. So for example, this one is to include mental health and well-being monitoring in ongoing health surveillance. So as you're doing health surveillance, you kind of think of radiation-induced cancers or different disease levels. That's kind of where our mind goes. But to make sure that that sort of health monitoring includes mental health and psychosocial supports. So as before, the stakeholders, the human and material resources, the achievement of outputs, indicators, that's all repeated here as well, and the references that help us build these action sheets. So to close off this detailed action sheet on including mental health and well-being in health monitoring, some of the key outputs for an example to make things real is including community members, local health services, that the collection of data actually includes mental health and well-being, and that appropriate instruments are being used, and we identify what some of those appropriate instruments might look like. In the chapter on challenges and future research needs, we touch on several points, points that I'm sure won't be a surprise to any of you. We know from past accidents that radiation causes fear. We know that it's an invisible threat, that we know that there's going to be debate in the media. We know that there's going to be ambiguity on dose exposure effects, and the resulting perceived risks that might result from all of that might drive mental health and psychosocial consequences. We also know that effective risk communication is essential. Members of the public need simple and practical advice. They don't need to go read a 300-page document to know what to do and how to be safe. Ideally, the information that's put out there should align from agencies like the ICRP, need to align with what local authorities are saying. So this has to be in a sort of harmony. And including stakeholder perspectives in all of that is key and critical to avoid causing more harm than good. And lastly, we know that by conducting emergency exercises, that we can promote mental health and psychosocial supports. How is this used? Where is this used? What can be done? So in fact, one of the exercises being led by the NEA, INEX 6, has a specific module for exactly this line item. So I'm really excited about that. They're going to look at some of the actions in our action sheets that we've developed. So the draft report, very excitingly, has undergone NEA peer review process. So thank you to those in the room who have provided comments. And now it's going through the publication process and will be available any moment now. But the major takeaways from the report that I want to leave you with are that the practical guidance provides stepwise actions that you can take before, during, and after an emergency. And much of this integration can be done in advance, but it's going to take integration. It's going to take transdisciplinary approaches, multidisciplinary approaches, interdisciplinary approaches. And it's going to take time and effort from people like you in this room who have a vested interest in the resilience of populations following all types of emergencies. So before I wrap up, I'd like to take the opportunity to thank the former and current members of this expert group. Their hard work and dedication started before the pandemic, and then I got to join during the pandemic. I hadn't met a lot of people until very recently. I just met Dr. Carr just now. It's lovely to meet you in person and not on a screen, but working for over 3 years together, it was my distinct honor to serve as their vice chair, despite most of that work being online. And of course, I'd like to thank you for your attention. And on behalf of Dr. Jacqueline Garnier-Laplace and myself, if you have any questions, if we don't have time today or you want to approach us at the coffee break, we would love to talk about this document because it's been a real pleasure.
Thank you very much, Julie. So we accept, question, please.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Thank you for the presentations. My question really applied to your presentation, also to Sanat. We have really only two practical experiences on this. One was on Chernobyl and was reported by very top specialists. The summary is in the proceeding of the Chernobyl conference that you may recall was chaired by Angela Merkel. And the other one is on Fukushima. That was reported in the IAEA report on Fukushima, also in the report of the task group of ICRP on lessons from Fukushima. Now, these two practical experiences that were analyzed by really very top experts, were not mentioned in any of these presentations. And I wonder whether you are going to take that into account in these future activities or not.
Is this on? Yes. Thank you, Abel, for the question. In fact, of course, we considered the experience from Chernobyl and Fukushima, and I did mention it briefly in the opening, but it was not on my slide. We basically had to shorten the slides as much as possible to fit onto the 14 minutes presentation. Pardon me. But the information was absolutely taken into account when we developed the framework.
Okay.
Okay.
If I might add, we did the same, but to respect the time, I didn't go through all of the background information and the annexes that we've included, but of course, very important examples of where we can improve and where things went well and where we can document best practices. Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much, Julie. So we're going to move on to the next speaker.
Our next speaker is Marie-Claire Cantone, who's a professor of physics at the University of Milan in the Department of Biomedical and Surgical Sciences. She's a member of ICRP Committee 3 on Protection in Medicine. She's a co-chair also of ICRP TG 109 on ethics in radiological protection for medical diagnosis and treatment, and a member of TG 114. And she was previously a member of ICRP 138, also the prior document on ethics. She's also involved in IRPA, where she's a member of the executive committee and the Italian delegate to OECD NEA CRPPH. Marie-Claire, the floor is yours to talk about learning from patient experience and interaction in ICRP TG 109.
So thank you. And yes, this presentation is addressed towards the well-being of the patient. So starting with what is indicated in the task group 109, so dedicated to the aspect of diagnostic, ethical aspect related to the diagnostic in medicine and also radiotherapy. So as we well known, I think, in the history, we have in the system of radiological protection the basis of the three pillars given by science, ethical and societal values, and experience. And though this indication is also promoted by ICRP publication 138, giving attention to the well-being of the individuals and population in general, not restricted in the medical part as the publication 138 was in radiation protection in general. So a clear understanding of the core ethical values and how they are related to the key principles is or can be they help to address the issues regarding the decision-making across the domain of radiological application, obviously also in the medical part. So here we have in the figures the first page of the ICRP publication 138 and the task group 109, the report of these. So in practice, the search of reasonable level of protection and tolerable exposure level is an ongoing and evolving question that depends on the prevailing situation that we have and the ethical and cultural values. One of the key message indicated in the report of 109 is that obviously the bases are on the publication 138, and the idea is to bring the ethical values that support the principle of radiation protection back into the context of patient care and medical decision making. And yes, the art and the practice of radiation protection in medicine seeks first the health, well-being, and the best interest of the patient. And we have the basis of ethical criteria to promote patient well-being in their best interest. And so we can have situation with ethical conflicts in medical practice, and these may be diverse or complex when dealing with radiological medical procedure. So in this, in the report of the task group, there is the exams on how, the question mark on how ethical values can apply in helping to resolve dilemmas in the medical practice with the team and between the radiological professionals and patients and the family members. In these views, Task Group 109 emphasizes the coherence between the value involved the biomedical ethics and those involved the radiation protection. So the report proposed key paired values that we have here written, but we will see more detail in the next slide. And the report aims to increase familiarity of radiological protection professionals with biomedical ethics and with ethical foundation of radiation protection to help to integrate this consideration into radiological protection in medicine. So the approach is to consider the biomedical ethics and radiological protection ethics that you can see on this table. And we can see, for example, the values, the ethical values recognized in radiological protection as in ICRP 138, beneficence, non-invasiveness, and justice, and so on, and that well known in biomedical ethics. So here are used the same color when we have the same approach. So beneficence and non-maleficence are for both. And then we have also recognized additional values and the procedural values. So for example, apart of the beneficence and non-maleficence, we have justice and justice, and solidarity is recognized as additional values, and we have dignity and autonomy, and moreover, prudence in 138 again related to radiological protection in general, and not equivalent in biomedical ethics, but recognized in additional value as precaution with attention of which kind of effect we have been in the medical also part or in radiological protection in general. And then we have the procedural value. If we take into account all these views and try to put all together, indeed, we have this result, so beneficence, non-maleficence, justice and solidarity, dignity, autonomy, and so on. Very easy to see. Now, this is an approach that put together both. And that is why it's important that, for example, the part who are more related to biomedical ethics, like professionals in medicine, also have the view of radiological protection values, ethical values. And among the three principles of justification, optimization, and limitation is well known that in the medical exposure, the patient exposure, there is not the justification, and a clear understanding of the core ethical values and how they're related to the principle of radiological protection are recognized to help this view in the domain of radiological protection. And for example, with justification and optimization, it is clearly based on the value of beneficence, non-maleficence. And ethical application of this principle supports the stakeholders to consider the value of dignity, autonomy, justice, and solidarity. And so prudence and precaution also are both related to justification and optimization, and different examples. So this is sufficiently clear, I hope, to put together in a clear way. And the consideration is that if we have inconsistent disparity of value, like all the values that we mentioned before, probably or inevitably there will be consequences in the implementation of justification and optimization. So the report of Task Group 109 started with the proposal of evaluation method for rating the compliance and non-compliance with ethical value. So here we have a table with all the values together, the ethical values and the biomedical ethics, dignity, autonomy, beneficence, non-maleficence, inclusiveness, and empathy. And these task groups, so the report a number of examples, so that are real examples. Sometimes the example of the co-authors that participated to these are examples that they feel or they know very well, so it's our example, practically real example. And on these different examples, 11 examples for the diagnosis and 10 for the radiation therapy, are evaluating on the basis of compliance. Very nice compliance or strong, not good compliance and neutral. And just a short example, because the time is like this. We use a name, Mary Jade, breastfeeding following a nuclear medicine scan. She was a single lady with a little baby, and so not a family that can help her go to the nuclear medicine. They told it, not problem with the milk, yes, but at the end they give her a leaflet and they say, no problem with the milk, but you cannot take the babies attached to you. And the lady, wow, as I know before this question, I take another, I was organized and so and so. So the attention of the patient related to the approach, the dose and so and so, but also on this environment taking into account the ethical values that we mentioned before. So the importance to address particularity of patients and the situations, the concern that we are facing too. And good timing is important to give information to allow the patient to use this information to decide how to proceed. So instructions that on the need for a carrier is limited contact in this example is important. So good communication should be structured and respect the dignity of the patient in their situations that can be different from one person to one person. So for example, just to give an example of the different 21 examples that you have on this document of the task group 109. The analysis was that considering dignity and autonomy of the patient was not respected, so no compliance in this example, and beneficence and non-maleficence, yes, there is the information about this not sufficiently present. Prudence and precaution, yes, given. This is considered at a normal level, and inclusiveness and empathy, not sufficient empathy with the patient in this case. So the scenarios are simplified and give a view for the ethical challenges, and yes, this view of the table can be nice. For the sake of both example and education also, because these examples are nice for the education, 21 realistic scenarios. Go to this document that was already over the consultation and now ready for the publication. Example of sensitivity questions also was added, provided to stimulate reflection and to open conversation regarding the compliance and non-compliance of the procedure. So we have these sensitizing questions, and we have just an example here. So for all the values that we considered in the table before and in the analysis in the example, here the thing just related to the example of the value dignity and autonomy. Just for example, we have many sensitizing questions. Have we discussed the role of patient wishes to take in decision making? Have we respected the patient confidentiality? What are the patient's goal and care? Has the patient privacy been respected? And so are not the same question, because the questions are related to the values, the ethical values that we recognize also here. So just to conclude, this is the figures with co-chair Bochum prepared very nice with the result of the examples of all the chapters. So we have the introduction, the ethics in radiation protection, a discussion regarding the practical development in biomedical ethics and the medical use of radiation relevant to ethical clinical decision-making, then review of practice of ethical perspective, and the examples that I taught before. 2 chapters are related to the examples, so example in diagnostic and other in therapy, and then finally the part related to education and training in ethics. But this part of the case-based example, so the suggestion is to go to see, and if it's okay for you to invent other examples on this, it is very nice. So thank you very much for your presentation.
Thank you very much, Marie-Claire. Any burning question from the audience? No? Okay, so we will go to the final presentation in this session that will be given by Professor Takamura on risk communication for recovery of the community in Fukushima. The floor is yours.
Thank you, Chairman. Today, I'm talking about our risk communication experience for the recovery of the community in Fukushima. As you know, just after the Fukushima Daiichi nuclear power plant accident, so Japanese government issued the evacuation order to the residents living within 20 kilometers from the nuclear power plant. Due to this evacuation order, almost 110,000 residents evacuated from their hometown. This slide shows the evacuation route of each municipality. For example, Okuma town firstly evacuated to Tamura city and then re-evacuated to Aizu-Wakama city, 100 kilometers from the nuclear power plant. And then Futaba town, at first, they evacuated to Kawamata town, and then finally they evacuated to Saitama prefecture outside Fukushima. So evacuees experienced repeated such evacuation. And then our Nagasaki University team has working around Chernobyl nuclear power plant for many years to support the patient with childhood cancer. And then also we implemented environmental monitoring. As you know, in Chernobyl, after the accident, residents within 30-kilometer zone also evacuated. But so far, no municipality returned back to their hometown. But actually, when we measure the ambient doses of this area, the dose is not so high, quite low. But they will not return. This is not only due to the radiation issue, but due to the difficulty of the re-establishment of the infrastructure, industry, and community after a long time evacuation. So that's why we started the recovery support of the affected community in Fukushima. Firstly, we supported the Kawauchi village, which is located within 30-kilometer zone from the nuclear power plant. They evacuated, after the accident, they evacuated Koriyama city, but according to the evaluation of ambient dose rates, it has been clarified that due to the wind direction in the initial phase of the accident, the contamination level of Kawauchi village was relatively limited compared with other municipalities. So that's why, after the termination of the accident, so Kawauchi village decided to return back to their hometown. And then they started the decontamination of the territory of the village. So this is a picture of decontamination of the residential houses. So through the removing the garden soil and washing the wall and the roof of the houses, they removed the radiocesium. And then residents started returning back just 1 year after the accident. So this slide shows the rate of the return of residents of Kawachi Village as of the May of 2013. So you see that the return rate is almost 50%. But as you see, especially in the younger generation, the rate of the return was limited. This is, of course, due to the educational issue of their children or occupational issue of the parents. But also, the anxiety for the radiation exposure also exists in the younger generation of Kawachi Village, which prevents the return of them. So due to this kind of situation, so Nagasaki University started the recovery support of Kawachi Village. We established the satellite office in Kawachi Village, and then we have evaluated the exposure doses of the residents, and then based on such a data exposure doses, we implement the risk communication. So our public health nurse stayed in this village for 3 years, and then they implemented the risk communication individually. And then she participated in the meeting with between the officers of the village and the resident. And then she answered the question about the radiation and health effects. And then also our university students visited the village and then organized a lecture to the elementary school children of the village. According to the Chernobyl experiences, you know, radiocesium is concentrating in the mushroom. But Kawachi Village is very famous for the taste mushroom. But the resident has anxiety for consuming such a mushroom. So that's why we started the kind of the collaboration between resident and the university. We asked resident to bring the mushroom, collected mushroom, and then inform the collecting spot. And we measure the concentration of radiocesium, and then prepare this kind of the mushroom map. At first, residents hesitated to inform us the collection spot because collection spot of the mushroom is a secret for the resident. But nevertheless, we every year prepare this kind of the mushroom map and then implemented the risk communication based on the data. The important thing is that we are the experts of the radiation, but we are not the expert of the mushroom. The residents are not the expert of the radiation, but they are the expert of mushroom. So that's why we can communicate with each other based on our each background. So fortunately, up to 2017, so the rate of return of Kawachi Village reached up to 80%. This is one of the model of the recovery after a nuclear disaster. And then currently, Nagasaki University established 4 satellite offices in Kawachi Village and Tomioka Town, Okuma Town, and Futaba Town. As you know, Fukushima Daiichi Nuclear Power Station is located between Okuma and Futaba. And then this slide showed the rate of return of each municipality. As I mentioned, Kawachi Village rate of the return is around 80%. On the other hand, Tomioka Town, which started returning 6 years after the accident, rate of the return is 15%. And then Okuma Town, which started the return 8 years after the accident, the rate of return is only 3%. And then last year, finally, Futaba Town started the returning, but the number of returning is only 61%. So this means that there is a significant gap of the recovery process in each municipality. So that's why we have to carefully implement the risk communication, recovery support based on the situation of the recovery status of each municipality. So this slide shows the intention to return to the hometown and the risk perception of each gender and generation. As you see, compared with the older males, the younger female has lower intention return. On the other hand, younger female has a higher anxiety to eat foods produced in Tomioka and tap water in Tomioka. And also, they have a higher anxiety for the health of themselves, children, and the next generation. So there is a generation gap of the intentional return and the risk perception. So we need to target the risk communication. So based on such a result, so we organized the risk communication with young mother and pregnant woman in Tomioka Town. In Corporation Town Office, we organized such kind of the risk communication with a young mother and pregnant mother. Also, this slide shows the, risk perception of the resident who already returned back, who decided to not to return back, and then who has not decided whether return or not. And then we found that the resident who has not decided whether to return or not has a higher anxiety, higher anxiety about the radiation exposure and health. Furthermore, they had the lower mental health status. So that's why we also organizing the risk communication to the resident who keep the evacuation outside Tomioka Town, and then provide the information so that they can decide whether return or not. So, as Emily introduced, now I am a director of the Great East Japan Earthquake and Nuclear Disaster Memorial Museum in Futaba Town, which opened in 2020. So if you have a chance to Fukushima, please come to our museum. Yeah, and then in the museum, so we have an exhibition of the archives related with the complex disaster, including nuclear disaster. And also, we organize a kind of the lectures to the young student or university student about such an experience of the complex disaster and the knowledge of the radiation health effects. So already 12 years has passed since the accident. Many of the young generation do not remember the accident and nuclear disaster. So that's why, such a continuation of the continuous education is very, very important to take over the lessons and experiences of the complex disaster. Furthermore, this is now we are doing the training course to the students in Fukushima. And then this is a picture of the food monitoring center in Kawaguchi Village. You see that the resident is working in this monitoring center. And then you see that the resident instructed how to use the food monitoring devices to the students. I think this is a typical picture of the establishment of radiation protection culture after a nuclear disaster in the community. On the other hand, so this Fukushima accident, from this accident, we learned a lot. So residents evacuated immediately after the accident. Actually, due to this evacuation policy, the external exposure doses of the residents were quite limited. But on the other hand, the many hospitalized patients also forced to evacuate. And then due to the poor health condition, many of patients died on the way of the evacuation or after the evacuation. So if they might not evacuate immediately, they might not die. So this is a very, very important lesson of this nuclear disaster. Furthermore, before the accident, the livestock industry was one of the main industries in this area. But due to the prompt evacuation, so nobody could feed the game animals, including the cow. So due to this, so many livestock animals were sacrificed. And then this which caused the strong, severe damage of the livestock industry of this area. So for the former workers of the livestock industry of this area, for them, there is no reason to return back. So how to balance the radiation protection and the industry is also one of the very important lessons of this accident. Yeah, so during already 12 years has passed since the accident, we learned a lot from this accident. So not only the radiation protection, but also we have to carefully think about the day-to-day life or quality of life, including the mental health issues. And also, we need to we need to learn how to communicate with a resident based on the scientific evidence in the community. So beyond the doses, we need to create the new framework of the for the reasonable recovery or justified recovery after a nuclear disaster. Thank you very much for your attention.
Thank you very much. Are there any questions for the presentation from Professor Takamura? Yes.
Professor Takamura, very nice talk. Quick question. The previous speaker mentioned how difficult it is to communicate risks. My question to you is like, how did you manage two conflicting evacuation orders during the Fukushima? US recommended 50-mile evacuation zone, whereas Japanese government recommended 20 kilometers. And how did you manage to compensate between these two?
Thank you very much for your question. So actually, several residents answered about such kind of the difference of the evacuation order between Japanese government and United States. But the important thing is to show the data. Actually, so I show the ambient dose of each area, and then if you stayed in this point, in this area, for example, 1 week or 1 month, so I calculate the doses and then explain, oh, this is on a almost equivalent of the one single chest X-ray or something like that. So that we can, measure the radiation doses. So using these doses, we can explain, and then we compare the other such a kind of, for example, the chest X-ray or medical examination, something like that. And then, so this is understandable for resident to their the meaning of the evacuation.
So one other question follow-up is like, we scientists struggles with the uncertainty in the data, the results we give, but the common people doesn't understand the uncertainty, and negative press always speaks on the uncertainty we speak. So how do you tackle those things?
It was very difficult question. I suffered from this for many times. But the important thing is that many experts should appeal the same message. This increase the trust. This makes the trust between the resident and experts. So this is very important. Different voice, but same message from expert is very important, I think. Okay, if you have any other questions, so we are going to the discussion. And then now 4 speakers presented make a presentation. So is there any question to all speakers? Okay, please go to the microphone, please. Thank you.
Ask them to introduce themselves.
Okay.
Thank you very much for the speakers. But anyway, the mental health, global principle of mental health, I understand. But the problem is the people who believed in science or not, we are divided into two, globally divided into 2 groups. Believe in science or not science. And so the mental health, how do you relate this problem with your mental health is very important.
Janet, please.
Well, I can take that question. Thank you very much. It's interesting that you propose to divide the whole global population in people who believe and don't believe in science.
Yeah. So the global principle of mental health, I understand. But so, for example, nuclear disasters and the difference between nuclear disasters and earthquake is very important. And for especially nuclear disasters, the last questioner said also, the science, so the people did not believe in science in that case, especially in Fukushima.
Yes, I understand your point. And of course, we are aware of all the difficulties and challenges our colleagues in Japan, experts in radiation protection specialists, they face talking to the general population. When we talk about mental health, psychosocial support, this is really starting from the very basic level of families supporting each other, local communities supporting each other, clubs, schools, etc., as a first level of psychosocial support. The second level is professionals. When we go to the responders, to doctors, to people who help people to evacuate. So we're suggesting, encouraging our member states and stakeholders who deal with this issue to invest resources in training specialists involved in response to be able to provide basic mental health psychosocial support. Then the third level goes to the more specialized trained people, psychologists. And the very highest level is already going to the clinical conditions and psychiatrists, which is a very small percentage of population. So the framework proposes tools, and tools which were developed, as Julie reported, proposes practical tools how to handle this intervention from the basic level to the more complex specialist interventions. Thank you.
So anyway, this would be discussed in the discussion session, I think. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Okay, please.
Monitoring, relief and rescue operation following accidental releases is very important, and the mental health aspects also. But my question is, when we are talking about the mental health of the people who may be affected because of the radioactive contamination or airborne activity when you are considering, what about the workers, the responders who have gone into the area for monitoring and relief and rescue? And what about the mental health and the psychological aspect of the family members of those workers who thinks our dear ones may be exposed to radiation?
Thank you for that question. So in the NEA document that I presented, some of our action sheets are for specific populations, like vulnerable populations, young mothers with children, and some of the action sheets are very specific to what you can do to support workers in that situation, realizing that it's difficult to go to work every day in a dangerous situation, just like our first responders. In Canada in particular, we recognized during the COVID-19 pandemic that it's not always doctors and nurses that you're thinking about, but even the people working at the grocery store, the front line, who's there, who do you need to target? So the EGNR document goes through workers, particularly nuclear energy workers, as well as their families and what can be done for them, and provide specific actions that can be taken to make sure that the employer is giving those supports when they're showing up for work day in and day out in a very difficult situation.
So you are addressing this issue also?
We are, yeah.
Thank you.
Thanks.
Okay, so before the question, please say to whom you ask. Okay. Any other questions? Okay, please.
I want to ask Takamura-san, you said very interesting thing. If older people in the hospital who did not evacuate does not go from that place to the other sites, then they might have arrived. And is in the ICRP, is there any rule or some kind of documentation stating in this case one should not evacuate, in other case one should evacuate? Is there such discussion going on? It's very important.
It's a question
very important, yeah.
It's a question to ICRP?
That's one thing, yeah, that's one thing. But how about you? If you have some rule.
Okay, so so far, as I mentioned, this is a lesson obtained from Fukushima accident. Now, in Japan, for example, I myself are doing the research work to calculate, evaluate the external exposure doses in the several scenarios. For example, we decide the ambient doses of the area and then calculate the data of the hospitalization, and then after that, the evacuation. And then we calculate the several patterns doses, and then try to justify the best appropriate such an evacuation. And also, the important thing is that not only for patient, but only for the medical personnel, we should consider about such exposure doses, because some of the medical personnel may be young. So that's why several such scenario and several objectives, such investigation is needed, I think. Okay.
Thank you very much.
Any other comments, questions? Okay, please. Oh, he's my student.
Yes. Narbek Arzakulov, Nagasaki University master student. Firstly, my question is addressed to the Janet Carr, representative of the WHO, and to all of the members. Thank you for your presentations. It was very interesting for me, especially who is studying in this field as an expert in inclusive governance and risk communication. Actually, like, it's very good and sounds good, like we already preparing that kind of frameworks, guidelines to the experts who are working on that. But we also heard like there is the limitation of the workforce. So who experts in the radiological protection, also we have that less people who can go to that kind of crisis area. Sometimes, so how can I say? How we can globalize this issue, how we can touch each people who are affected, or that to the all peoples who are around them. Because, you know, like, it's very good. It was like you are doing some kind of mission in the Ukraine, and also I want to join to the recovery process in the Ukraine to work with people. But there are a lot of other issues like earthquakes in Afghanistan, in Turkey, in Syria, and there are some war situation in Palestine or African countries. There are a lot of peoples who are affected some kind of crisis, and they have some kind of mental issues, and they cannot handle, how can I say, to take responsibility, and their well-being is affected. So my question is like, how we can globalize what we are doing, maybe attracting some kind of leaders, life coaches, life trainers. So now is media industry is developing. Like, our framework guidelines is to the experts, but what with the normal people? How we can touch them? Yeah. Thank you.
Thank you very much. I think it's rather a comment rather than a question, because I'm very much on the same page with you. And as we know, that ocean starts from the drop of water. So even little efforts will contribute eventually to the solution of the global issues. And this is exactly why we are proposing the new tools based on the WHO framework. And as you mentioned, disasters happen all the time. Today, people are dying at wars and from natural disasters in many places in the world. And of course, we cannot make sure that we are 100% covering blanket approach to everybody, but we can start somewhere. So people who are actually going to the high security zones, for example, the UN personnel, we are trained in basic approaches, what to do to provide psychosocial support. Just last week, I was attending a training for the UN personnel on safety and security in the field. And during the training, the instructors team included a psychologist because the conditions were brought as close as possible to the realistic. We were traveling in the UN convoy. It was a simulation exercise. We were taken hostages. We were attacked by a group of terrorists. There were explosions. There was armed people. It was really realistic. So after every little fragment of the exercise, we would stop and discuss and analyze what was done wrong, what was done correctly. And psychologist was every step with us. And nowadays, many responding agencies are including psychologists on board into the emergency teams. And this is becoming quite common already. And when I visited Ukraine last year, I have seen it myself that many humanitarian agencies present today, there are hundreds of them in Ukraine on the ground. Many of them have psychologists among them or people trained. So it is really important, as you pointed out, I agree with you, to make sure that we reach out to every member of the society, but of course in conditions of ongoing conflict or an ongoing crisis, it is extremely challenging. So we can do our best and hope that we help people. So that's what I can say. Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much. So very sorry to say, due to the time limitation, we have to close this session. So thank you very much all speakers, and thank you very much the participants for your very active participation. Thank you very much.